Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon from wherever you're joining. Welcome to another session by YSI South Asia. Today, we are having the third session at the Early Career Researcher Series. And today, we are happy that we have been joined by Dr. Vijayamba R. She is an assistant professor in social science at the National Law School in Bangalore. And she's a development economist interested in studying women's work in labor markets. She completed her postdoctoral stint at the Center for Sustainable Employment at Azim Premji University in Bangalore and was a part of this team behind the State of Working India Report 2023. And her PhD work focused on women's role in livestock economy, including their ownership of livestock assets, labor contribution, and decision-making in livestock economy. And she is currently awarded I think she also finalized the NCAER NDIC postdoctoral fellowship to explore measurement issues in women's work using secondary data. Her research interests include particularly women's work, the utilization of time, the decision-making, social norms, and issues of measurement. And today she'll be talking about women's time use patterns and paid and unpaid work in India. And we thank you, Vijayamba, for joining us. And also, we welcome you to YSI South Asia. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Arun, for that introduction. I'm really happy, and it's my pleasure to be, part of this early career, series. And I also thank YSI and INET for making adjustments in rescheduling the session. So it's my pleasure to be part of this initiative, and it's a great platform, to present my work and get valuable feedback. So with that, I'll just begin. I'll share my screen. Is this visible?
Yes. Maybe the full screen
I'm just
mode.
trying to full screen mode. Yeah. Is it visible now?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. Yeah. So today, I would be talking about women's time use patterns of paid and unpaid work. So this work is like a combination of two different projects. So one, as Arun mentioned in my in the brief that he shared for the introduction, with the NCAER in the postdoctoral work that I just finished. So I tried to estimate women in economic activity using the time use data. So I'll be presenting that work. And another is a paper where I'm working to understand the relationship between paid and unpaid work using time use data. So at the outset, I would like to thank the reviewers at NCAER and the comments that I received from Professor Sonalde Desai, Pallavi Chowdhury, and the entire team in improving my work. And the other part where I look into the relationship in the time use of women between paid and unpaid work. It is a collaborative work with Rosa Abraham and Raghav Srinivasan at Azim Premji University. And this is a working paper. So I have structured the presentation like this. I will spend some time on the motivation and discuss some major arguments in the literature, which leads to my objective, followed by the data and method that I have used, and show the results, followed by some concluding remarks. So it is well known in the literature that particularly in the labor force surveys, underestimation of economic activities that women do is a major problem. So in the labor force surveys, there are two broad factors that are responsible for this. So one is the definition errors and other is the survey errors. So when I say definition errors, the definitions that are used in the labor force surveys do not encompass all the economic activities that women do within the homestead. And the other is the survey errors. So in survey errors, there is the respondent bias and the investigator bias. Now, respondent bias is when women themselves do not identify all the economic activities that they do. A very common example is that when an investigator goes to the women and asks, "What all you do? What are the activities or economic activities that you carry out?" A very common response is that she identifies herself with the household chores and care activities, and the other economic activities do not come out. In the survey errors, a very common another error is the investigator bias. So often as investigators, we go to the male head of the household and ask, what are the activities that women in the household engage in? Here again, the economic activities would not get reported. So this is hugely identified in the literature, and it has been there over years in the labor force surveys. So time use survey as a method in this area is much better identified as being useful to record all the activities that women do, because the method itself gets differentiated from the labor force surveys. So in a time use survey, all the activities that respondents do gets recorded, and later based on any definition or framework, persons could be identified as being economically active or not. So this is my motivation with estimating women in economic activity. Now, apart from economic activity, coming to the unpaid work, what is known, from a very long period in developing countries and particularly India in the literature is that a large share of women's time is spent on carrying out unpaid work. So this gives them very less time to engage in paid employment and also leisure. So in India, the first countrywide time use survey was carried out in 2019. Very what do you say, primary numbers from the survey show that a woman spends 4 hours on carrying out domestic services in the household, whereas an average male spends around, say, 30 minutes or just half an hour carrying out domestic services. So the gender gap in the time that is spent on unpaid work is extremely huge. And I think India is one of the countries which has a largest gap in the gender divide in terms of the time that is spent on unpaid work. So with this as my motivation, as I said, I have tried to look into two things. One is estimating women in economic activities, and the other is the relationship between paid and unpaid work. Now, what literature, major papers and literature have identified in these broad arenas is this. So coming to economic activities, as I previously mentioned, time use as a method has advantages in identifying all the activities that women do. In India, the pilot time use was conducted in 98-99 in 6 states. And a very prominent paper by Indira Hirve and Sunny Jose in Feminist Economics tried to estimate women engaged in economic activity. So they compared the numbers from pilot time use survey with the employment and unemployment survey, which is the labor force survey. And the numbers clearly showed that the time use survey reported a higher estimate of around 58% of rural women who were economically active, as against around 25% in the labor force survey. So with this work, I'm trying to contribute in this literature where I'm trying to identify women in economic activity from the 2019 time use survey using a constructed definition, which I'll explain in the subsequent slides. Now, coming to the literature on paid and unpaid work. So women spend a huge share of their time on unpaid work, and that leaves them less time to engage in paid employment. And it also has relationship to the kind of employment that women do. Often they engage themselves in self-employment and other precarious forms of employment, which is very close to the homestead. And they engage in unpaid work, or often as helpers with any household enterprise, that is carried out. So the 2019 time use survey, after it was brought out, a lot of papers and literature identified the disproportionate burden of unpaid work that women face, and they also discussed what are the determinants of unpaid work. I have listed out a few of them. One is that the social norms plays a very huge role. So uh, scholars and authors have tried to identify what is the explained component and unexplained component. So a major part is the unexplained component, which is traced to the social norms that goes with the huge share of time that women spend on unpaid work. Another factor that I have come across in papers is the kinship roles. So the roles of being a daughter-in-law versus a daughter, and the difference in time that is spent on unpaid work is one such factor. And there are variations regarding utilization of infrastructure and how it pans out in different states, which is again responsible for the differences in time that is spent on unpaid work. A few studies have also seen that with progression in education, there is not, say, difference in the unpaid work that is carried out, as based on the type of employment that women engage, the time that is spent could be varied or reduced. So, keeping these papers as our motivation, what we do is we build upon this work and we are adding to the literature on this front. So, in the papers that we have reviewed, the employment comes from the usual principal status that is collected in the time use data. But we identify two different types of employment from the ICATUS classification in the time use data, which I will explain. And we also will we also look into the interaction between education and employment. So that is the kind of contribution that we want to make in this area of work that has been done. So with this background, the two main objectives that I want to focus on is first, estimate women in economic activity using the time use data of 2019. And the second is investigate the relationship between women's time use with regard to the paid work and unpaid work that is carried out. As I mentioned, the data that I have used for both of these objectives is the first countrywide time use survey that was carried out in India in 2019. So they have the NSO, National Statistical Office, has collected data in half an hour slots, and a maximum of 3 activities in this half an hour slot, demarcating it to 10 minutes each, has been recorded. So the activities are coded and classified according to the ICATUS, which is the International Classification of Activities for Time Use Statistics. So there is information on major and minor activities, simultaneous activities, and the kind of day also is recorded, whether it is a normal or any weekly variant. So this is about the data. Some of the limitations that is again identified is that major and minor activities are asked to the respondents. For example, a woman herself is asked to identify what is a major and what is a minor activity, which is again prone to bias because of the internalization of social norms and other factors, which becomes a problem. And another is that activities that are lesser than 10 minutes are not recorded. So anyone who has carried out field work in the rural context, for example, knows that there would be many activities that a respondent, particularly women, carry out, which is less than 10 minutes in sporadic and scattered intervals throughout the day. So all these activities, could go unrecorded. And data is also collected from other members. So there is proxy reporting of data, which becomes an issue. So if data on women is asked to other respondents, particularly male members of the household, it could result in inaccurate data, particularly on the economic activities. So despite all these limitations, the first countrywide time use data is representative, and it is collected from all the states. and they have collected data for one reference day in the week, which is again random. So it is the only data that is representative across state level. So I have used this data for analyzing both the objectives that I have mentioned. So now I come to the method. First, I'll talk about the method for my first objective, which is estimating women in economic activity. And then I will talk about the method for the second objective. So I use the unit level data, and I use the ICATUS classification to estimate women in economic activity. So what I have tried to do is I try to compare the reference period of the labor force survey and time use, and also the definition of the labor force survey and the time use survey. So now coming to the reference period, so the labor force survey that I'm referring to in this context is the periodic labor force survey of 2018-19 to keep it in the same year. So in the PLFS, the reference period that I have used is current weekly and current daily status. Now, what is this reference period? Current weekly is a person who is economically active for at least an hour on any day in the reference week. And current daily status is a person who is economically active for an hour or more on the specific day. From the TUS, as I said, the data is collected for a day. And here also, I pick I go with persons who are economically active for at least an hour or more on the given reference day. So this criterion makes my reference period comparable across both the sources of data. Now, coming to definitions, PLFS 2018-19 identifies an economic activity as, any activity that results in production of good or service for pay or profit. And there is also production of primary commodities for own consumption, such as crop farming, livestock, forestry, fishing, mining for, own use. And there is also own account production of fixed assets, such as construction of own house, digging of a well, etc. So this is the definition of economic activity in PLFS. Now, from the TUS, I try to construct a definition which matches with the PLFS basically. So there are 9 broad divisions in the ICATUS. The first one is employment and related activities, and the second one is production of goods for final use. So in production of goods for final use, I particularly pick the division 21, which relates to production of primary goods for own use, and there is construction for own use. So this constructed definition ensures that it is similar to the PLFS definition that I'm using. So my constructed definition says that any person who is economically active in these 3 categories, which is employment and related activities or production of goods for final use, particularly production of primary goods or construction for an hour or more on the reference day, fits into this definition of economic activity in the particular reference period that I'm going with. Now coming to the method that I have used for understanding the relationship between paid and unpaid work, we identify 2 different types of employment. One is self-employment and the other is wage employment. Now from the ICATUS, self-employment refers to persons who have engaged in household enterprises to produce goods, or employment in household enterprises to produce services. And the specific, category for the division is mentioned here. And wage employment is employment in corporations, government, and non-profit institutions. Now, unpaid work includes domestic service for household members, then caregiving, and also unpaid volunteer trainee and other work. So domestic service basically includes preparation of meals, cooking, upkeep of household and related activities. Caregiving is childcare and elderly care. And any other volunteer and trainee falls into the last category. So in understanding this relationship, we have used a regression analysis where the time that is spent on unpaid work is the dependent variable. And as explanatory variable, we have the levels of education of a woman, and we interact education with the time on employment in both the categories of employment, self and wage employment. And we have also controlled for different household factors. So the four different levels of education are not literate, primary and middle, up to higher secondary, and graduation and above. And the different controls that we have used are the number of adult men, women, and children in the household, marital status of the woman, industry of the household, basically looking to whether the household belongs to an agriculture or non-agricultural industry, and monthly consumption expenditure of the household. So now I move on to the results. First, I will start with estimations of women in economic activity, and then I will move on to the relationship between paid and unpaid work. So this graph shows the estimates of women in economic activity, taking only employment and related activities from the time use survey. So this is just using the first, division of the ICATUS list. So what these estimates show is that when only employment and related activities from the TUS is used, it gives a very similar estimate to the estimates of the labor force survey. So in this graph, the first bar refers to the employment and related activities of TUS, and the second one is current weekly status of the PLFS, and the third one is current daily status. So if we see across, say, rural women, rural men, urban women, and urban men, the estimates are almost similar. So there is not much of a difference. So particularly if we look at rural women, we identify that, say, 20% are economically active across these, say, different definitions from the TUS and also the labor force survey. Similar is the case for urban women. For rural men, we see slight difference, but again, it is more or less similar. So moving on, next, what I have done is I bring in the constructed definition from the time use survey that I explained earlier. So what is the difference between the previous graph and this one is that in this, to the employment and related activities, I have included the production of primary commodities and also the construction, which I mentioned earlier. So when I do this, what we see is that there is a significant difference in the estimate of women in economic activity. For instance, in the case of rural women, the time use estimate shows that around 32% of women above 15 years are economically active, which is much higher than what comes out from the labor force surveys. Similar is the case for rural men. There is a difference that comes out from the time use estimate, which says that 75% of rural men are economically active as against 68 and 63% of the labor force surveys. So this leads me to the third finding here, which says that this constructed definition of the time use survey gives a higher estimate for the rural sector than the urban sector, right? So to go back to this graph, we see that this constructed definition is making much of a say difference in the case of rural women and men than what is seen in the urban sector for urban women and urban men. So the obvious explanation is that in the rural sector, men and women largely engage in production of primary commodities for own use, be it crop farming, livestock, forestry, fishing, etc., which brings out that difference. And the second caveat is that there is underestimation of men's participation in these activities. So often, underestimation of women's activities is only spoken about. But in this case, we are seeing that there is some underestimation for men's activities too, and time use survey is bringing that. However, the extent of underestimation is large for rural women. So we see that here the difference is around 12 to 13 percentage points, whereas for men, it is around 6 to 7 percentage points. This trend so this is at the country level estimation. However, for some states, there were some exceptions where the underestimation is higher for men than women. So those specific cases need to be probed in more. But this holds good for all India estimation. So now I move on to the results where I talk about the relationship between paid and unpaid work. So I'll start off with some descriptive statistics and then I'll talk about the regression results. So this graph shows the time that is spent on employment and related activities for women across sectors and education levels. So the four different levels of education, as I've already mentioned, are these. And this is a per person graph, meaning irrespective of whether women engaged in economic activity or not, they are brought out in this particular calculation. So this includes rural and urban sector, as the graph is showing. So what comes out through this graph is that there is a U-shaped relationship in the time that is spent on employment and related activities. So we see that women who are not literate and those who are graduated and above levels of education are spending higher time than the intermediate levels. This pattern, however, doesn't exist for men. I have not included the graph here. And even when we restrict the type of employment for women, so if we even take women, those who are only participating in self-employment and wage employment, still this relationship could be seen, meaning women who are not literate and those who are, have graduated and above, they are spending higher time in employment than the intermediate categories. Now, when we look into the time that is spent on domestic services for household members, for women, the relationship is different. So we would expect that with increasing education levels, the time that is spent on unpaid work, should go down. But that is not seen here. So irrespective of the levels of education, the time that is, spent more or less remains the same. For example, an illiterate woman in this category spends around 4.5 hours on domestic service, and a woman who is, has obtained graduate and above levels of education also spends 4.42 hours. There is a slight reduction that is seen, but however, more or less, the pattern, the time spent on unpaid work remains the same. So we probe this further in the regression framework. So these are the results of the regression. I will explain, the major coefficients. For the audience who are not familiar or who have not come from the economics background, and try to keep it simpler. I'll, emphasize more on the interpretation. So this table basically shows the regression coefficients where we have tried to understand the relationship between the time spent on employment and unpaid work. So the first two columns correspond to the self-employment, and the next two are wage employment. So we have, two different columns again in that. One does not include control. So the household controls that I was mentioning, one is without, and the second one is where it is included. Similar for the wage employment. Now here, so how we interpret, this table is that this minus 0.41 basically says that a woman who does not have any education, for her 1 hour of self-employment reduces the unpaid work by minus 0.41 hours. So that is an interpretation that we are making here. With levels of education, a woman who is, has obtained primary and middle levels of education in the rural sector, if she engages for 1 hour in self-employment, the time spent on unpaid work goes up by 0.65 compared to the base category, which is not literate category. Similar is the interpretation for the corresponding education levels. My main interest coefficient is that the interaction between education and the kind of employment. So this is the main coefficient of interest. So what we see here is that a woman in the rural sector who has obtained primary and middle levels of education and who is in self-employment, for her, an hour of self-employment reduces the unpaid work by minus 0.04 hours, which is around say 4.2 minutes. And similar is for the higher secondary category. So an hour of self-employment reduces the unpaid work by minus 0.07 hours. And even when controls are included, this interpretation holds good. So this is how we interpret these results. Now, in the urban sector, what we see is the same. So I will, come to this part where we interact education with the kind of employment. The same result holds good, that when women in self-employed, category and with primary, middle and higher secondary, educated categories compared to the base, which is not literate, an hour of self-employment brings down the unpaid work by minus 0.07 hours. And for the higher secondary category, it is minus 0.11 hours. So which would be around 6.6 minutes. And this result holds good with controls too. So coming to the wage employment, what is different here is that in the rural, sector, we didn't see this result, but for the urban, this result is what, I want to emphasize. So for a woman who is educated up to graduate levels and above in wage employment, an hour of wage employment rate increases the unpaid work by 0.11 hours. So what we are basically saying is that a woman, if she spends time in wage employment, her unpaid work is not reducing, whereas it is increasing. So this is where the entire literature on the double burden and related things come in. So we are seeing that the time that she spends on wage employment is putting or it is leading to a corresponding increase in the unpaid work, and this holds good even when we do it with and without controls. So we wanted to probe this result further, and we try to understand what is that kind of unpaid work that is leading to this increase or a positive coefficient for urban graduate women in wage employment. So time use data has these three different categories of unpaid work. One is domestic service. As I mentioned, care work is another, and unpaid volunteer trainee work is the another category. So it was the unpaid domestic service for household members, which is responsible for this positive coefficient. So this includes, say, preparation for cooking and the actual process of cooking, upkeep of household, and maintenance of a household, etc. So the domestic service for household members was the category that came out positive and significant. Now, I will just mention a couple of robustness checks that we have carried out, and I will come to the concluding remarks. So we saw this positive coefficient for urban women who are graduate, who have obtained levels of education of graduate and above category. So what we thought is, if there are infrastructure, in the household, if there is supporting infrastructure, will there still be a positive coefficient? So time use data has collected information on the kind of infrastructure for washing clothes, sweeping floor, and cooking. So we brought in those as controls, where the base category was manual work done in these things. For example, manual work for washing clothes or sweeping floor was the base, and the other things were in the corresponding other categories were brought in as controls. So even when we did this, the positive coefficient remained. So which means that even after controlling for the kind of household infrastructure, when women engaged in wage employment, when the urban graduate and above levels of educated women engaged in wage employment, there was still a say corresponding increase in the unpaid work. So this was a robustness checks with regard to the positive coefficient seen for urban sector. Now, for the trade-off that was seen in the case of self-employed, women in both rural and urban sector, one thing that we were interested to see is whether women, I mean, the time reduced because if they engaged in simultaneous activities. So in the literature, simultaneity is one factor that is identified with women in self-employment. So we wanted to understand if they carried out unpaid work with simultaneous activities or anything related to self-employment itself, if that could be leading to a reduction in the time spent on unpaid work. So what we did is we carried out, this a framework. We kept the same framework, and we tweaked it a bit by including simultaneous activities and one without simultaneous activities. So in the first specification, the dependent variable is unpaid work, and it does not include simultaneous activities. In the second equation, the dependent variable, which is the time that is spent on unpaid work, includes simultaneous activities. And on the right-hand side, which is the independent variable, keeping the same framework, the interaction between education and the type of employment is without simultaneous activities. So basically, we want to see that if there is a trade-off for women in self-employment, when they do it with simultaneous activities. So this is what we wanted to check. And what the results show is this. So I'm using the same, say framework for the table, but the difference is that here the two columns show that the first one is without simultaneous activities and the second is with. Similarly, there is self-employment and wage employment, like it was shown in the previous few slides. So I would like to bring your focus, to this coefficient of interest as I've been talking about, which is the interaction between education and the kind of employment. So we see that the trade-off exists irrespective of whether the unpaid work is without simultaneous activities or with simultaneous activities, and it is significant in both, both the frameworks. However, the trade-off slightly increases when the unpaid work is with simultaneous activities. So this is for the rural sector. And even when I show the results of the urban sector, it holds good. So there is a trade-off for women in self-employment, up until intermediate levels of education compared to the base category. And it holds good irrespective of whether the unpaid work is with or without simultaneous activities. But the effect slightly increases with simultaneous activities. So to conclude, I basically tried to, show some results of estimating women in economic activity for my first, say, part of the analysis. And second one was the relationship between paid and unpaid work. So we saw that time use data, gave a higher estimate of women in economic activity. So it is important to have periodic data on the time spent. So in the Indian context, till 2011-12, we had the employment and unemployment surveys, which at least had some follow-up questions for women who principally identified themselves in domestic duty and other activities. So though there was underestimation, some of the literature actually included these women to get a modified or augmented estimation. After that, from the periodic labor force surveys, we don't have those questions that is asked. So it is at least important to have periodic data. So this could be done in various ways. Some of it is that ask time use data for a subset of the population, because a major argument is that time use data is costly and expensive to be carried out periodically. If that could not, if that cannot be done, at least ask time use data for a subset of the population. Or bring back these follow-up questions, and along with that, ask the times that women are spending on these other economic activities to women who are primarily engaged in domestic duty and also being employed. So this will give some information on the time that they spend in various categories. So it is important to have data on time use, because attaching time to women's activities gives a higher weightage than asking themselves to identify whether they're economically active or not, and then asking probing questions following on that. So that is the remark for the first objective. And coming to the relationship between paid and unpaid work, when women engaged in self-employment, interacting it with the education, we see that there is some trade-off. Whereas for the urban educated women in wage employment, there is a corresponding increase in the unpaid work. So this largely could be traced to the literature on social norms and probably household structure and the norms surrounding that, which is not allowing women to reduce unpaid work, after being engaged in paid employment. The time use data does not have information on social norms, which does not allow us to establish causal relationships. So I think I conclude with this, and some of the ongoing work in this regard is that we are trying to further disaggregate the number of children in the household and classify it into different categories, such as 0 to 3 and 3 to 6, to see the difference in terms of the care activity that women do, because the younger, households with very young children could have a higher care burden. And we are also trying to see the unpaid work for elderly category in households where there are elders with 60 and 65 plus years. And we are also trying to separate the unpaid work with the 3 divisions that I mentioned for all the estimations that we have done to see what comes out. So this is some of the work that we want to do. So with this, I'll just stop and open to comments and further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really interesting, and really, I'm sure there is many questions or many details that we have to look into. And there is I'm sure all of us are aware that time use related works are not that many in India. So thank you, Vijayamba, for bringing that into this forum. Now we are open to questions. So as others think about questions, I think I'll just start with a clarificatory question, which is that the age is 15 and above, the age of the women, and what is the upper age limit? That's the first part of the question. And maybe I missed this. The household controls, what were they? What was the household control?
Yeah, so the age of the women is 15 and above. So generally we take 69, I think, as the cutoff. So yeah. 65 or 69, should be the upper age limit. Okay. The household controls are number of adult men, women, children, and the type of industry of the household, whether it's an agriculture or non-agriculture. And the monthly household consumption expenditure. So these are some of the main controls. So when I presented, this work in one of the previous seminars, so that's what they said, that controlling specifically for the number of children and bifurcating it into 2 categories, again 0 to 3 and 3 to 6, and again with elders who are 60 plus, could give a different picture about the unpaid work. So there again, differentiating it into domestic service for the household and care, which is very different, could bring further insight. So I think I want to, see what those could be. But yeah, so the household controls are important in this regard.
Yeah, because the way I was thinking, like it's often the household characteristics that I'm sure you are aware the social norms, but then you also mentioned that the time use survey has these limitations with regard to connecting it.
Yeah, they do not have data on social norms. I think in the Indian context, NFHS data is the closest, where we have some questions on restrictions on mobility, whether women have to take permission typically from husband or other members of the household to go out to places such as market or to meet her family and friends. So there are questions on mobility, decision making, and wife beating. and ownership of assets. So there are different categories which NFHS has rich information, but in time use data, we do not have information on anything related to social norms.
I have more questions, but I'll let others ask.
Since nobody is asking, I'm asking one question. I'm not at all expert in this field, but nevertheless, we can always ask questions. So my question is, do you have any position on whether or not at some point in future, or somebody might be working, how to kind of find monetary value of this household contribution of these women? So there are some crazy ideas who says that our GDP is so low, but if you calculate all the works that women are doing every day in household, if you can somehow create a mechanism that and you create a value out of it, do you have any position, or do you have any idea, or do you work on this kind of, or do you know anything on these crazy ideas?
Yeah, thanks, Atvik, for that question. So there is, I have not worked on this, but I have read related literature to this. So how do we value unpaid work? So basically, we have something called a satellite accounts, so which try to put a monetary value to the unpaid work and assess the contribution. So how do we put this monetary value is again, so suppose if those number of hours are spent by the women in wage work. So if a woman does say 5 hours of unpaid work, if she was in the paid market, then what is the corresponding wage that she gets, could be, say, estimated. So I think this is one of the ways of, attaching a monetary kind of a contribution to the unpaid work. But I'm sure there are other ways of doing it too. I have not, tried to do it. But the major, position is that rather than say putting a monetary, contribution to the unpaid work, the discussion should be about easing the unpaid work. So in developing countries, particularly in India, we have to say take the conversation forward in improving the infrastructure and say care infrastructure, basically providing crashes on work site and making it as universal as possible. So we all know that monetary contribution, attaching monetary contribution to unpaid work will give very huge numbers, because the hours of unpaid work that goes in definitely leads to that. But what is more important, in my view, is how do we ease this unpaid work in a very obvious, way of doing it. It is complex. So, enhance or broaden the infrastructure care access, and that should come from the, state support. So making it as universal as possible to all women across different types of employment. So Karnataka, for instance, has this program called Kusina Mane, where for women who are working on, construction sites are provided childcare access. So we have to take conversations forward in such, areas.
Yeah, just if I can put a follow-up question. Such care work is again often not considered as a work. For example, the Anganwadi worker, they are the volunteers.
Yeah.
So how do you see this contradiction? Even when you are employing like ASHA workers, when you are employing huge number of women, will such database that you are working with, will they consider ASHA worker or Anganwadi worker as a work, or how would you treat that kind of work?
Yeah. So I think thanks for that question. So this is a huge problem that is identified in the literature. I think if I can remember, particularly during COVID, when there was so much discussion on ASHA workers and related literature on Anganwadi workers, because they are, say, identified as volunteers. And they are not, readily related to as, being employed in the related, categories of work. So this whole problem, I think, goes back to the question that I have raised of underestimation of women in economic activities. So these economic activities might not, be confined for those within the homestead, but also these kind of, say, work that you have rightly identified, such as ASHA and Anganwadi workers. So I cannot readily recon in the labor force surveys how they are identified. Suppose if they report themselves as, say, helpers, which is 21 is one of the category. So then, they are coded in that category. Or if they say that they identify themselves with 92 and 93, which is majorly engaged in domestic duty and other activities with domestic duty, they do not come into this workers. So this is again the limitation of the labor force survey. Whereas in the time use method, if I just record all the activities that the women do in the reference, say, period, then according to my framework, I will net them in as workers. So that is the main advantage of the method.
Advantage. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for the answer.
Yeah.
I think there is one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Shveer, you can ask it.
Yes, please.
Hello, good evening, Professor. Thank you for the presentation. And I really want to ask one question. Since my master's thesis topic was like similar to this, and I came up with an interesting results. So it was related to when so RBI has a data sets where few districts are underbanked district and few districts are regarded as okay, the credit facility would be increased in districts. When I was looking into labor data sets and when I was looking at the what was the where these intervention has been provided and what were the changes in labor uh, hours, not labor hours particularly, changes in labor scenarios there. I found very interesting data that whenever these in underbanked district where RBI provided a lot of free like credit services, the women participation in labor force within a group of 16 to 21 rose up, while 21 to 25 went down. So while I never looked into time usage data sets, have you looked into within the age group, different age groups in women, how these time usage has changed? And one more question
So
adding up to this. Sorry. Yeah. So when we look into caste scenario of this, we see uh, talking about rural India, there is a sweet spot where after completing intermediate or 10th uh, till 10th education, the women are stuck in a market where upper caste women who have just passed 10th will not go to a labor force work, which is field related to work, while the same effect is being seen in urban area where women from lower caste will not go to work if she is attained education till some level, then she'll not go to a labor force, while the woman force with high education or very low education will look out for a job. Have you like decomposed effect of different age group and different caste in time usage study? If yes, like what were the results?
yeah, hi Ashwarya, thank you for those two questions. So if I've understood your first question correctly, so you have you said that across age categories, particularly 18 to 25, and probably the next one is 25 and above, restricting to 30. What is the difference in, say, the time that they spend on employment, right? Was that your question?
Yes, Professor. Similar to
Yeah.
if we break it into age, yeah.
Yeah, so so I have so in my unit data I have just taken 15 15 and above. So I think from my say recalling of the report, so in the former category, which is say the first one, 15 to 25, a huge share of the time would be spent on education, because in India, as we have seen that over the recent years, the levels of attainment of education of women is almost on par with men. So the gender gap in, say, obtaining years of formal education is almost narrowing. So, so the time spent on, say, employment for the first group would be lesser than 25 plus, because say women who are 25 and above would have finished their education, and if they are in the workforce, they would be spending more time on employment. And in the unpaid work, I think, again, irrespective of education, the time that they spend, say, remains the same. But for the former group with respect to unpaid work, because they're spending more time in education, the time could be slightly lesser. So this is what I recall. I am not very sure of the exact numbers of the time spent. So, you could go back to the time use survey or report of 2019 and, check the exact numbers. But I'm not sure if the specific, age categories are really given. But I think at least for these category of 15 to 25 should be there. So, you can write to me otherwise to get the exact numbers. The second question was about intersection of caste and age groups, whether women from the, underprivileged categories, they have a compulsion to work in the labor market, and, whereas others do not have it, right? So I have not looked into the unit level data of time use data for this specific question, but I've done some field work in Karnataka for my doctoral work, where I have collected time use data with an organization called Foundation for Agrarian Studies. So some of the observations that come from this is that all women across, say, caste groups are obtaining, education. So at least the higher secondary levels, be it diploma or, completing the 12 years of formal education. And yes, the young women from, say, the Dalit category have the compulsion of working on field or, laboring out as agriculture laborers, as you rightly said, because of the compulsion. Whereas the women from the dominant caste groups do not have this compulsion and they want to say, they want to engage themselves in paid employment that is commensurate to the levels of education that they have obtained. But overall, so now talking about both the caste groups, all the young educated women want to say get suitable employment in non-agricultural sector. So they do not want to say continue with crop farming or livestock raising that their parents have been doing. Though the Dalit women, for instance, do it for some time because of the economic compulsion. So the problem here is that for the rural women, there is no adequate generation of employment. So they are not getting suitable opportunities that, could be suitable for the levels of education that they have obtained. So again, here, there is a lack of, generation of employment opportunities and restrictions on mobility and social norms where, getting married and all these things play out. So I think these are some of the observations of, intersection of caste and age groups with the time spent on employment and their labor market choices. Yeah, I hope I have answered your question. Thank you.
Yes, Professor. Thank you for your response. Majorly, I was very confused when I came up with those results, and I saw the employment of boys remain same at the same age group, while women, where the credit facilities in rural area improved, they went more into farm labor. So like women who are like the families, households who are bit from rural background, they converted their uh, young girls like between 16 to 21 into farm laborers because the credit facility is more there. So yeah, kind of. I look into time usage data. It's look very interesting. Thank you for your answer, Professor.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ishwara. We can have on that final question. I'm sure Vijayamba has to leave. But Srishti, you can have your question.
Okay, I have two questions. So one is, do you have any insights or findings on total economic activity, that is paid and unpaid activities of women who are formally employed compared to women who stay at home or men who work? The idea is to specifically understand, do employed women also engage extensively in unpaid work? That is my first question. And my second question is, does the amount of unpaid work performed by women increase or decrease based on household income?
Okay. So the first question I mean, basically you're trying to ask um, if um, if employed, if women are employed, then sorry, I didn't. What is the time that they spend on economic activities based on the type of employment, right?
No, so the question is, so women who are employed, they also engage in unpaid work, right? So if we compare it with the women who stay at home, what proportion would that be? And if we compare it to the men who also are employed, do we have any insights on something related to that? Because my limited understanding is even the women who are employed must be engaging in unpaid work.
Yeah.
And if we total the economic activity, that might be equal or maybe more than the women who stay at home. Just my
Yeah. So yeah.
limit.
So the descriptive graph that I showed, basically irrespective of whether women engaged in, employment related activities or not, the unpaid work, stayed the same, which was around, 4.5 hours for the not literate category and 4.4 hours for the graduate and above. So even if we restricted this for the kind of employment, which is self-employment, and the wage employment, the time that they spent on unpaid work still was more or less similar, to say those who did not work. So irrespective of, whether women worked or not, they had to perform that the share of unpaid work. So the time that they spent on unpaid work for, those who are working could probably be less from the descriptive patterns, but from the regression, what really comes out is particularly with wage employment, there is a corresponding increase in the unpaid work. So even if you are in the labor market, women have to do the corresponding share of, unpaid chores. So I cannot give the exact numbers, but the burden that doesn't reduce. So this is what is for the first question. Can you please repeat the second question?
I will. So what I'm getting at is that even if women who are working, if we take total economic activity, whether it be paid or unpaid, there is a chance that women who are working are actually engaging in more economic activity. So it might be interesting to see that, compare it, like women who are working and non-working and total economic activity, whether it is paid or unpaid. It might be interesting and the results might be interesting. I don't know how it would pan out.
Yeah, so basically in this paper, when we identify wage employment and self-employment, when we say self-employment, it is for the market. So it is paid, and even wage employment is when they go out and engage in the identified category. So both of them are paid employment, and the corresponding what happens to the unpaid work is seen. So we have accounted for the two different types of employment as paid categories only.
Okay. And the second question is, if we see like the amount of unpaid work performed by women, will that increase or decrease based on the income of the household?
Yeah, so we have control for the monthly consumption expenditure of the household. So even after controlling for that, these results hold good. So in the urban sector, when a woman who is graduated and above goes out and say works in wage employment, an hour of say wage employment has a corresponding increase in the unpaid work that she has to do. So this is even after controlling for the monthly consumption expenditure, which is the proxy for household income in the time use survey data set.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes,
Thanks
thank
a
you.
lot.
Yeah, thank you, Srishti, and thanks, Vijayamba. I mean, I am sure we'll stop the session now, but I heard about your plans to extend your work to this under 3 age, above 3, but also the elderly part, which I am very personally very passionate about. And then, I mean, it makes complete sense for your argument that, okay, so there is an elderly in the household, which means there is a set of time that the women have to spend on, those activities. But there is a recent work by Ajay Mahal and others, which said actually that it could be the other way around too, which means that their presence sometimes actually drives in at least in certain regions, drives up the women's labor force participation, which means they take care of the children. And so that was interesting from my perspective, that it could be both sides. And so in general, we look forward to all your extensions of your work, and thanks a lot for taking out time to come to our our forum, and we hope you continue to involve with us in the future, and all the best for all the future works that you have. Thanks again from the whole YSI.
Thank you so much, Arun. I think it was great. Like, I had valuable inputs presenting my work in this platform, and do send me the exact link for that paper. I mean, I would love to take a look. So what I think, I mean, my immediate thoughts is that when the elderly, a person is a woman, then there could be a helping hand to the unpaid work. So the gender dimension again comes there. So, I would love to take a look at the paper. So I'll definitely stay in touch. And
I will. I'm incidentally a co-author in the paper, so what I'll share.
Oh, yes. Oh, that's great. Yeah, sure.
Thank you from whole YSI and INET. Thank you, and we hope we can in person meet you at one of our events, and hope to see you soon.
Yeah, looking forward. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah. Bye.
So